D.B. Cooper. In November 24, 1971, a man went to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter at Portland Airport and paid cash for a one-way ticket on Flight 305 to Seattle-Tacoma. He wrote the name Dan Cooper on the ticket. Witnesses described him as a white male, around 40 to 45 years old. Cooper boarded the flight. Seat 18E, last row. The flight had 36 passengers and 6 crew members. It took off from Portland at 2:50 p.m. as scheduled. Shortly after takeoff, he handed a note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. She was seated in the flight attendant's jump seat at the rear of the aircraft, directly behind him. At first, she thought it was a phone number and put it in her purse without opening it. But Cooper leaned toward her and said, "Miss, you'd better read that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner opened the note. It read, "Miss, I have a bomb in my briefcase and I want you to sit next to me." She complied with his request. Asked to see the bomb, Cooper opened his briefcase. Inside was what looked like a bomb. He closed it again and began stating his demands. Schaffner wrote the demands down, took them to the cockpit, and informed the crew. Cooper demanded $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. The plane circled over the Seattle and Tacoma area while the money and parachutes were being prepared. In the meantime, he asked another flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, to stay with him. She later said Cooper seemed very familiar with the area. When the plane flew over Tacoma, he looked out the window and said, "Looks like that's Tacoma down there." When asked why he chose Northwest Airlines, he laughed and said it wasn't due to any grudge against the airline, but because of a personal issue and because this flight suited his plan. He remained completely calm the entire time, smoking cigarettes, requesting drinks, and asking about the route. After landing in Seattle, the money and parachutes were delivered, and all passengers were released. Cooper stayed with the crew and ordered the plane to take off again, this time toward Mexico City at low altitude and low speed. Around 8 p.m., in dark, rainy conditions with limited visibility, the rear door of the aircraft opened and Cooper jumped out with a parachute. When the plane landed in Reno, only a tie and part of the equipment were left behind. A large search operation was launched across forests, rivers, and lakes. The Army, the FBI, and hundreds of volunteers searched for months, but no trace of him or the money was ever found. Years later, only a small portion of the money was discovered near the Columbia River by a child, a finding that complicated the case rather than solving it. In the following decades, the FBI investigated hundreds of suspects, from Special Forces members and professional parachutists to employees of the same airline, but no solid evidence was ever found. Some experts believe he died that same night in the forests of Washington, while others believe he successfully escaped and hid the money forever. In 2016, the FBI announced that it was ending active investigations, but the case was never officially closed. Garrett broke Trapnell. On January 28, 1972, a man named Garrett Brock Trapnell boarded TWA Flight 2. At first, he handed a note to a flight attendant, then forced his way into the cockpit and pulled out a .45 caliber pistol that he had hidden inside a cast on his arm, taking control of the aircraft. He forced the crew to change course toward John F. Kennedy Airport in New York and presented a list of demands, including $306,800 in cash, a stop in Dallas to secure the release of a prisoner named Jorge Padilla, a full pardon for himself, asylum in a foreign country, the release of political activist Angela Davis, and even a personal meeting with U.S. President Richard Nixon. After the plane landed in New York, negotiations with federal authorities continued for about 8 hours. During that time, Trapnell allowed 93 passengers to leave the aircraft, but he continued to hold the crew as hostages. At around 11:30 a.m., FBI agents, who had posed as replacement pilots, entered the aircraft and at the right moment fired 3 shots. Trapnell was wounded in the shoulder, and agents immediately arrested him. At trial, he claimed he was not guilty because he suffered from mental illness and therefore could not be held responsible for the crime by reason of insanity. Trapnell argued that he suffered from schizophrenia and multiple personality disorder, and that another personality named David was the real person responsible for the hijacking. However, that claim was quickly called into question. Prosecutors presented an audio recording from several months before the incident, in which Trapnell proudly spoke about his ability to pretend to be insane. 4 months later, at a second trial, he was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. Trapnell served his sentence at the maximum security Marion prison, where he continued to plan and engage in criminal activities. On May 24, 1978, his friend, 43-year-old Barbara Ann Oswald, hijacked a charter helicopter and forced the pilot to land inside the grounds of Marion Prison in an attempt to help Trapnell escape. However, during the landing, the pilot struggled with her, took away her gun, and killed her. A few months later, on December 21, 1978, Barbara's 17-year-old daughter, Robin Oswald, carried out a similar act. She hijacked a TWA aircraft and threatened to detonate a bomb strapped to her body, unless Trapnell was released. In the end, it was discovered that the bomb was not real, and she surrendered without any casualties. After these events, Trapnell was placed under heavy security. It is said that he spent much of the final years of his life in solitary confinement, and in the end, he died in that same prison in 1993. The Entebbe hijacking. In late June 1976, Air France Flight 139 left Tel Aviv, heading toward Paris. The aircraft carried around 246 passengers, most of them Jewish and Israeli, along with 12 crew members. Along the way, the plane stopped in Athens, Greece, where 58 more passengers boarded, and among them were 4 hijackers. After taking off again and continuing toward Paris, the aircraft was hijacked by 4 hijackers, 2 Palestinians and 2 Germans. The plane was then diverted toward Benghazi, Libya. It remained there on the ground for several hours for refueling, and then continued its journey. Eventually, more than a day after the flight began, it landed at Entebbe International Airport in Uganda. The hijackers moved the passengers into the transit hall of an abandoned airport terminal. At the same time, Idi Amin, the president of Uganda, was aware of what was happening and allowed the hijackers to remain there. On June 28, the hijackers released a statement announcing their demands, including $5 million and the release of 53 Palestinian and pro-Palestinian prisoners, 40 of whom were held in Israeli prisons. They warned that if their demands were not met, they would begin harming the hostages starting from July 1st. In the following days, the Israeli hostages were separated from the other hostages, and 48 non-Israeli hostages were released. On July 1st, after the Israeli government agreed to negotiate, the hijackers extended their deadline until noon on July 4th. After the negotiations failed to reach a solution, Israeli officials decided that a military operation would be carried out to rescue the hostages. By questioning the released hostages, Israel managed to obtain detailed information, including the layout of the airport, the location where the hostages were being held, the number of hijackers, and even details about their weapons. After that, a special unit was formed for the operation, led by Yonatan Netanyahu, brother of Benjamin Netanyahu. On the night of July 3rd, Israeli forces took off in several C-130 Hercules aircraft heading toward Uganda, and traveled more than 4,000 kilometers at low altitude to avoid being detected by the radars of nearby countries. When they reached the area near Entebbe, they entered the airport without warning. To deceive the guards, they used vehicles that looked like Idi Amin's convoy in order to approach the terminal. But at the airport entrance, Ugandan guards became suspicious and ordered them to stop. At that moment, a sudden firefight broke out, and Israeli forces were forced to act quickly. From there, the clashes between Israeli forces and the Ugandan army expanded, as airport security was effectively under the control of the Ugandan military. Israeli forces stormed the terminal and, after a short but intense fight, took control of the building. In the end, all 7 hijackers inside the terminal were killed. After the attack, Israeli forces returned to their aircraft to evacuate the hostages. However, during this stage, another clash broke out with Ugandan forces. During this brief fight, Yonatan Netanyahu, the commander of the operation, was killed, and several Israeli soldiers were also wounded. After the fighting ended and the evacuation was completed, Israeli forces left the airport together with the rescued hostages. In total, out of 106 hostages, 3 were killed. 1 remained in Uganda, around 10 were wounded, and 102 were rescued. Thanks for watching until the end. Make sure to like and subscribe for more videos.